Now, some might go, why even talk about Joe Biden? The guy is on his way out. Let's face it, probably in every sense. Move on, let it be. Now, the simple answer to that is no. You don't let enablers of genocide just walk away with their bloodied hands and pretend it never happened. You hold them to account, and you do that when they're alive, and you do that even when they're long dead. Even if they never face justice, what they did must be understood. Now, we've seen how much of liberal America rehabilitated George W. Bush, going gooey-eyed as he once handed candy to Michelle Obama, acting as though he was morally superior to Donald Trump because he doesn't send mean tweets, wiping away the mass slaughters of Iraq amongst all the other crimes. Well, this matters in the present because Biden will still be president of the United States until the 20th of January 2025, which is nearly 22 weeks away. 22 weeks in which Israel can continue to commit one of the worst crimes of our age, and because of the likely continuity represented by Kamala Harris as vice president until proven otherwise. Now let's listen to Joe Biden at the Democratic National Convention, clearly prepped to try and diffuse the fury amongst so many natural Democratic voters, whipped up because he has armed and actively backed, in every sense, one of the worst atrocities of our age.
A few days ago, I put forward a proposal that brought us closer to doing that than we've done since October 7th. We're working around the clock, my Secretary of State, to prevent a wider war and reunite hostages with their families and surge humanitarian health and food assistance into Gaza now. To end the civilian suffering of the Palestinian people and finally deliver a ceasefire and end this war. Those protesters out in the street, they have a point. A lot of innocent people are being killed on both sides.
Firstly, just a fact check there, as he tries to say that those protesters on the streets may have a point about butchery that his bloodied fingerprints are all over. He says a lot of innocent people are being killed on both sides. Now, he knows full well that almost all Israeli civilians killed by Hamas or other Palestinian militants were killed on 7th of October. In war crimes, to be clear, as I've always been clear from the very beginning. And he also knows that even if you go by the official death toll, well over 28 times as many Palestinians have been killed, not even taking into account the disparity in population size and therefore the proportions in question. And that official death toll is likely a drastic underestimate. Indeed, one estimate by academic health specialists would mean that around 133 times as many Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli state. Even here, he's being deceptive because the way this is presented gives the impression that there is an ongoing slaughter on both sides taking place. That is absolutely and completely untrue. And it also erases the fact that this entirely one-sided slaughter, which has taken place every single day from the 8th of October last year, is being armed by his administration. You listen to that thinking there's some horrible killing war going on. Somewhere else in the world, the US is just standing aloof from what's happening, looking sadly at it, look at all the death, rather than directly facilitating it. The US administration, Joe Biden's administration, just approved a $20 billion weapons package to Israel a few days ago. Weapons which will be used to kill many more thousands of Palestinians than have already been killed in the first place. But the real lie is this working around the clock to get a ceasefire claim. Now, sometimes you just need a bit of plain speaking, so here goes. That is bullshit, total bullshit. For a start, Joe Biden could end this whole horror show like that, click of his fingers, or rather specifically with a phone call. If US aid stops, Israel's genocide stops. Sometimes things really are that simple. Now let's hear, shall we, from US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and this is following his meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
In a very constructive meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, he confirmed to me that Israel accepts the bridging proposal, that he supports it. It's now incumbent on Hamas to do the same. And then the parties, with the help of the mediators, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, have to come together and complete the process of reaching clear understandings about how they'll implement the commitments that they've made under this agreement. But the next important step is for Hamas to say yes, and then in the coming days for all of the expert negotiators to get together to work on clear understandings on implementing the agreement.
Firstly, funny, isn't it, that you don't hear Netanyahu saying any of this? Why isn't it coming from his lips? Is Blinken now his spokesperson? But then you read what news outlet Axios says, which is that statement baffled some Israeli officials who told Axios that Netanyahu's hard lines are actually making a deal much harder to reach. Axios also report Netanyahu endorsed the US proposal, which incorporated several of his updated demands, knowing Hamas would reject it, senior Israeli officials tell Axios. Now, wait till you hear what this deal actually is. It really is quite something. More specifically, Hamas objects to the fact that the proposal doesn't include a permanent ceasefire or comprehensive Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Yeah, okay, let's just be clear. This isn't a ceasefire. This would mean pausing the slaughter for a few weeks, exchanging some hostages, and then continuing the mass slaughter until an endpoint defined by Hamas as until Hamas is entirely defeated, which is completely impossible for many reasons, one of them being a state engaged in a genocidal onslaught will mean enraged and traumatized survivors will keep taking up arms, however many existing militants you kill, and another being that Israel defines Hamas in a completely all-encompassing way, which allows for, well, genocide. Now, it goes on, this deal. It would also not allow the free movement of civilians from southern Gaza to the north because it endorses Netanyahu's demand for control of the Netzarim corridor. So, permanently dividing what is already a tiny strip of land the size of East London, with a pre-war population of 2.2, 2.3 million, into a northern and a southern zone with much of the north depopulated and the population desperate, homeless, concentrated in a devastated southern zone. Weird how they're not agreeing to that one, isn't it? And then it goes on. The proposal would also give Israel control of the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia corridor along the Egypt-Gaza border, as Netanyahu has demanded. Now, Hamas said Netanyahu also reversed previous concessions and set new conditions in the prisoner exchange process. So, permanent total control of a divided Gaza by Israel as it fights a forever war. I cannot believe Hamas is not agreeing to this deal. I would also note the Israeli state is not getting its hostages back alive like this. And we should always be clear that taking of civilians as hostages, whoever does it, is a grave war crime. 6 Israeli hostages who should never have been taken, well, their bodies have been retrieved by the IDF, all of them killed. And as per Israeli news sources, the initial assessment is they suffocated in tunnels because of gas from an Israeli army attack. Hideous, and again underlines that the mass slaughter of Gaza includes the mass slaughter of Israeli hostages by Israeli armed forces. Those remaining hostages will only be returned alive with an actual permanent ceasefire deal, but that is too late, much too late, for so many of those hostages. Now, let's finally listen to a former negotiator for Israel, Daniel Levy, who is a brilliant analyst who I've interviewed on this channel.
Wishful thinking is not a policy. Spin is not a policy, but it can get you through news cycles. So the BBC and much of the American and other Western media are reporting in optimistic ways that maybe there's a deal being done because that's what US officialdom is telling them. But I can tell you that in the region, no one is buying it. Your own correspondent, of course, and the way you've said it is to put skepticism on this. But if they can just get through, muddle through Chicago, hopefully muddle through an election season as they see it, and this isn't just about words, but what they're doing is they're saying to the Iranian axis, you are going to undermine this, and using that time in order to place further military assets in the region. So what you have is a US that is trying to make sure that its ally Israel continues to have freedom of operation. Interestingly, the Israeli security establishment is background briefing that Netanyahu is still not giving the kind of mandate to negotiators that could bring a deal. The hostage families in Israel are out briefing that they don't trust the prime minister. One of the people found recovered bodies today, one understands, could have been part of an earlier deal had Netanyahu agreed to it. This is, unfortunately, the result of the Israeli system being treated with an impunity, not being held accountable to what it's doing, because of course, Hamas should not be holding these Israeli civilians. That's a crime. Israel should not be conducting the actions which have led to arrest warrant request at the International Criminal Court, have led to urgent measures being called for by the International Court of Justice because of plausible genocide. None of these things should be happening.
Understood.
But Prime Minister Netanyahu is able to carry on because the US runs cover. And indeed, the US is about to, it seems, place the blame again at Hamas's door when that does not accord with the facts.
So this is all a sham to help the Democratic Party get through the elections and shore up Israel's regional role. As he says, the Israeli system enjoys impunity, and this is all being set up so Hamas is presented as being to blame, when, as he says, that does not accord with the facts. Look, I get it, guys. I get the desperation to stop Donald Trump. I get the specific threat he poses to an already heavily caveated US democracy. I get the plausible threat of civil war in the United States. I get what a menace Trump also represents to the Palestinian people. But some leverage has to be brought to bear here, because what actual tangible evidence is there that Kamala Harris is going to stop Israel's genocide, let alone Joe Biden, given he has months still in office in which, as things stand, tens of thousands of more people are set to be killed. In any case, Biden is lying. Don't believe him. Don't let him get away with it. Please like and subscribe to leave your thoughts and your comments as ever. Keep the show on the Reddit, patreon.com/OJ84. Listen to the podcast. Speak to you soon.